explained why she was arrested, and they set a court date, and she told them in her countercultural way, I'm not going to the court date. You haven't even given me the information to properly defend myself. So she missed her court date. They issued a warrant for her arrest. They came over to her house and let themselves in. First, the police said that they got keys from the leasing office, but they lied. And then later, they admitted that they kicked down her door to arrest her for failure to appear in court for a traffic violation. And when they bust down her door, she had a legally owned gun. And she said, don't come any farther. You're not coming in here. So they walked back out. And there was an 8-hour standoff. And police determined that they were tired of waiting and shot and killed her and shot her son. I think, and if you look at her Instagram, she posted over 10,000 times on Instagram. She was doing it like 20 times a day. It's like her autobiography. She Instagrammed excessively about Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. Those cases, which came after she was, I believe, wrongly and violently arrested, struck her in a very deep way. Sandra Bland did as well, and she talked about this all the time. She just determined, y'all, I'm not going to jail. And it seems peculiar to us on the outside, but she said, I'm just not going. I've seen what happens. This is how she was thinking. I've seen what happens to Freddie Gray, saw what you did to Philando Castile and Alton Sterling. I'm going to stay here. And we can look at that and call her unreasonable. What I want to tell you is that what those young men did in Dallas, and Baton Rouge, and what Corinne Gaines did, I think all three of their decisions were destructive, but I understand them. I don't approve, but I think that is where we are going. That when you have so much injustice and so little justice to make the injustice right, people do desperate and ugly things. I won't talk much about Nate Parker, but the story of Nat Turner is an example of that. It's actually a very complicated story, because Nat Turner and what ended up being about 55 people, I haven't seen the film yet, but I have a good understanding of what they did, and it was crazy. Like, they were smashing the heads of men, women, and children with rocks and bricks, killing grandmothers with machetes. I mean, it was a wild thing. And people are conflicted, like, whoa, should he even be a hero? My pushback on that is, I don't know, but what do you expect someone who's forced into slavery to do? This is not slavery, where we are today per se, but the level of injustice that people are experiencing with so little being done to make it right is clearly, we've crossed over into a time where what happened in Baton Rouge and Dallas, what Corinne Gaines did in Baltimore, that's new. I feel, as still a person of hope, that we have to pivot to some real hardcore solutions. Or, and it's predictable, there's nothing right now that suggests that any of the violence that we see with police brutality or mass shootings, there is nothing at all, zero, that suggests that is about to slow down. There have been no qualitative improvements or changes. I want to suggest, we said 10, I can barrel through 10 or I can give you 5, okay? We'll see where we go. How many of you, just be honest, I asked this question, how many of you plan on becoming a police officer? Right. One. Is she the only one? I'm gonna make sure I'm two. But not you, right? It's a problem. I spoke at Harvard Law School, Yale Law School, and I asked students there, how many of you plan on becoming prosecutors? No hands. None. Zero. I'm speaking to the law school. They all want to become civil rights attorneys. They want to become Michelle Alexander. The first solution that I talk about in this series that I'm writing for the New York Daily News, people were surprised at, but we have a supply problem with the fields that are causing us the most problems. There is a terrible supply problem where right now in America, this blows my mind, 95, almost 96% of America's prosecutors are white. Crazy, that's ridiculous. It looks nothing like Agnes Scott, it looks nothing like America. 85% of America's prosecutors are white men. They represent a much smaller fraction of American society, but dominate America's prosecutors. And when I speak at law schools around the country, I struggle to find any black students who want to be prosecutors, but even just conscious, well-thinking people from other backgrounds. Like when I say 95% white, I mean no Latinos, I'm not talking about no Asian Americans, no Native Americans. It's 95% white. And so what it does is it puts us in a position where our entire argument ends up being, I need them to change. And it doesn't work very well because they don't feel like they have to change. In most cities where I speak, most people cannot even name their local DA, cannot name their local police chief, and some people didn't even know that most major cities you elect your sheriff, they don't even know his name. And so it might not be you, but I do want to tell you, when conservatives say something like this and people are surprised when I say it, if we don't change the supply quality of who becomes police and prosecutors, we are absolutely going to continue to have the problems that we have. This isn't revolutionary. It's the same concept that we see at Agnes Scott. It's saying like, hey, if we're going to change Agnes Scott, we need representation on every level. You see the same conversation happening in corporate America, saying we need America's CEOs and vice presidents of corporations to look like America. The same thing needs to happen with police and prosecutors. That's solution number one. In essence, in this room, there was one woman who said, I want to enter law enforcement. And she may change her mind. Right? I mean, and that's what a lot of people get close and say, you know what? I'm not doing that. And I get it. I would not want to do it. But what ends up happening is those two fields, which end up making the most essential decisions for our life and safety, end up being dominated not just by a particular ethnic group, but also by a particular way of thinking. And it's a problem. That's the first solution. We have to change the supply chain. 3 quick solutions are all things that will have to happen. They're preventative measures. Every study, and there are so many studies, and I've written about this, show that women are significantly better police officers than men. It's not radical, it's fact. Now, that does not mean that you eliminate 100% of police brutality if you hire more women. Each of these solutions will change police brutality and reduce it by 2% to 8%. But if you do 10 of them, you may in a year or 2 years or 10 years, or in our generation, reduce it by 50 to 75% if you just begin doing a few of them. Almost every instance, almost the worst instances of police brutality are almost always with men. And it's not because women are not on these police forces. The studies show, and I have those studies. You could, if you go, I'll tweet and Facebook them today. So if you go to my page, you can see them. Show that women are, on average, in police forces, significantly less brutal per capita. Not just because there are fewer women, but right now women only make up 12% of American police, and men are 88%. The more women who join those police forces, it doesn't also just change police brutality, but it changes those police forces as well. For instance, they felt like if the number went up to 20 to 25%, the instances of sexism and discrimination in those departments would also go down significantly. It's easier for men in police departments to be sexist and ugly when there are so few women in the departments. But even tacking that number up begins to change it in other measurable ways, and there's some powerful studies there. Another very reasonable innovation, so practical, there are 10 different studies that show that if you require police officers to have a college degree, it changes everything. No police department in America right now requires their police to have a college degree. About 95% of police departments don't require any college education. Then you have a few, like New York, where I just moved to, that require their incoming recruits to have at least 60 credit hours. And that could be at a 4-year institution, or they could have a 2-year degree. And contrary to popular belief, while New York actually does have a lot of police brutality, it is actually in the lower third of states in America. It's just that when police brutality happens in New York, the story is widely told, and there's some really terrible stories. But it's actually significantly worse in Tulsa and Albuquerque. And it's actually a problem in Atlanta, and people just really don't understand how big of a problem it is, particularly outside of the city of Atlanta. But that when you require a 4-year degree, it would be like having elementary, middle, and high schools that didn't require the teachers to have any formal training. It would be problematic. And in my article about it, this blew my mind. I found that cosmetologists in America are required on average to have 300% more training hours than police officers. That the average, that to have, even in the state of Georgia, to get your cosmetology license requires like 1,200 hours of training and almost 1,000 hours of apprenticeship. But to become a police officer in Georgia, it only requires 600 hours of training. So literally, I'm not demeaning the profession, but to do hair and nails, you have to train 300% more than to have a gun and badge. That's ridiculous. We have to at least radically improve and increase how much training police have, but that if you require them to have a college degree, it changes basic things, like their ability to write quality reports. If you earned a 4-year degree, you might have ended up in a room like this before you became a police officer. If you spent 4 years at Georgia State or any school in Atlanta and then became a police officer, you would have had so many rich encounters that would change your mind in a way that then affects the way you police. Another basic solution, and these are things that we can fight and advocate for. Police officers have to be drug tested regularly and randomly. Like an NBA player, like a UFC fighter. Josh Gordon plays football for the Cleveland Browns. You saw he got this great catch last night from RG3, if they're any football fans. He missed all year last year because of his marijuana use. I actually defend it. I'm for the legalization of marijuana, but a lot of guys that play football say that it helps them with pain, and that it helps their healing time and other things. He missed the entire year last year because of the failed test with marijuana use. Study after study after study shows that there is widespread steroid abuse in America's police departments. But most police departments in America only test you once, and that's through the application process. I've had current and former police officers all over the country tell me that if right now, tomorrow, every police officer in America was forced to take a random drug test that tested not only for steroids, but cocaine and heroin and other drugs, that you would probably see somewhere between 10 and 20% of officers fail those tests. There are a lot of reasons. A lot of officers have PTSD. A lot of officers are actually coming straight from the military, where they have untreated mental health issues. And I say this in another point, another solution, is that America's police officers have more untreated mental health issues than any field in America. I say this very sensitively, and you don't hear a lot of people in and from the movement speak sensitively about the job that police do, but I've talked to police officers, particularly black officers in Atlanta, and St. Louis, and New York, and on a daily basis, they see some of the worst. I spoke to a police officer in New York who was an officer for the MTA subway system, and when, for instance, when people are hit by trains, he's the guy that has to come there and look and examine and explain. And he told me, he was like, Shaun, it's some days it's hard for me to come to work the next day. Because they're seeing, like, I'm not even going to describe it. I talked to officers who said, not even talking about police brutality, but they are the people when people commit suicide, when there is horrendous sexual abuse of children and other things. They have to come there and they're the first people to have to be like, what happened? You did what? Or this, and what happens is, a lot of these officers end up falling back on alcoholism. Some studies show that up to 25% of America's police officers are currently alcoholics, active alcoholics. And they're on the force and they're not being tested for it. All I'm asking is that America's police be tested like NFL players. NFL players don't have guns. NFL players can't wrongfully arrest. If NFL players are tested regularly and consistently and randomly, so should America's police officers. Let me tell you 3 other ways that we can begin to advocate for positive solutions to police brutality in America. Every police officer in America should have, in addition to their firearm, at least 3 less, I used to say non-lethal, but 3 less lethal weapons on their body. I've studied the case of Laquan McDonald in Chicago, who was a young man, 19 years old. A lot of us think that Laquan McDonald died last year, but he actually was killed in 2014. We just learned about it 18 months after he was killed. The video came out 18 months later. And I listened to all the radio broadcasts of police officers talking to each other, and several police officers were saying, we need someone here with the taser. We need someone with the taser. Now, the man who ended up shooting Laquan McDonald, he did not hear, though he was already out of his car. He comes out. Mind you, he had already been reprimanded for brutality on the police force 18 times. Had never been suspended. In my piece on this issue that I'm about to talk about, there were at least 300 police officers in Chicago who had been reprimanded for brutality 20 or more times without being suspended, including about 50 who had formal, verified complaints of brutality 50 or more times. So he just starts shooting Laquan McDonald. Laquan McDonald was no threat to him. But no one on the scene even had pepper spray or a taser. Even